without adding any form of chemicals to it. It's a physical process. Why? Because do you consume a voltage field in an electronic circuit? No. Voltage performs a physical process of opposite electrical attraction. Therefore, when you release the hydrogen oxygen atom, therefore when you release it, you're now processing and using the energy from the hydrogen atom, which is 2.5 times greater than that of gasoline. That's not my figures, that's the National Bureau of Figures, National Bureau of Standards figures. You can go over there and look at their books. You will see that that energy is 2.5 times gasoline. Notice the reference. It's not 2.5 times fingernail polish, and it's not 2.5 times lipstick. It's 2.5 times gasoline. It's a very powerful fuel. Now, since we're now overcoming the electrical attraction force, go ahead. We are also now starting to switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecules. So when they tell you it takes a tremendous amount of energy to release something. For an example, I have an electrical magnet here, and I energize the electromagnet, and I draw a metal plate up to it that weighed 1 ton. As long as that electromagnet is creating the electromagnetic field to hold the metal, if you kept on trying to pull that metal, you would never break the field, right? But how much energy does it take to go over there and simply switch off the switch to de-energize the coil? Would not the metal just simply fall apart? So on the covalent switch off, what happens is you're putting electrical stress. Are you not now deflecting that negative charge electron to the positive voltage field? Is that not so in physics? You ever look at gas ionization tubes? Therefore, what happens is you're now translating the electrical stress to the particles inside the nucleus that are arranged in a geometrical configuration. They are now spinning, and as you put the electrical stress onto these component parts inside the nucleus, it now slows down the gyroscopic speed, and under the electromagnetic theory of magnetism says that whenever an electrically charged particle moves through an electrostatic field, what's its byproduct? Anybody know? The electromagnetic energy. So the strength of the electromagnetic energy is directly related to the velocity or the speed of the moving of the electron. Is it not so? So if you will slow down the movement of the speed of the velocity of the electron, if you now slow down the gyroscopic action within the nucleus, you now can weaken the electromagnetic fields of the atoms. Now we know in physics there are 4 forces that affect the atom. What are they? The electrical force, the electromagnetic force, weak and strong nuclear force. What's the number 1 that affects the other 3? Voltage. You attenuate the electrical fields of the atom, you can attenuate the fields of all of the other parts of the atom by voltage. Go ahead. Now how do we do this? And do it in such a way that we don't consume a great deal of power. The Lord had me to develop what we call a BIC coil. Now we've taken the voltage zones here and we've now constructed a resonant cavity. Now, is not natural water a dielectric liquid? Sure it is. Since it has 8 electrons in its L orbit, it has a total capacity of 8 electrons in that orbit. It says I don't want any more electrons. I'm not going to exchange electrons. And so the dielectric value of water is around 78.54, or it poses the movement of electrons 78.54 times greater than air. Is it not so? So if you don't process the water in any way, utilize and key in on the dielectric properties of water. Now these are very simple answers to a very complex problem. I will assure you, back during the era of embargo, there was not in the books. If there were in the books, I would not have obtained the patents into processing. In order to do this now, when I put the dielectric liquid between 2 electrical plates, what do I form? Electronic guys? Capacitor, do I not? Now, if I hook a coil in series to this capacitor, here and here, what do I have developed? A resonant charging choke, do I not? And therefore now you set up a pulsing where you're now taking like 12 volts and amplifying up to 20,000 volts, and as you pulse this, you're now creating the magnetic field of the coil, which opposes the movement of the electron. And because of the inductance capacitance of the coil, you're now allowing voltage to be applied across the resonant cavity and restricting ampload by 90 degrees. So therefore, when you adjust the pulse frequency, you're tuning into the dielectric properties of water. Amp flow goes down to minimum, and voltage tries to go towards infinity if the electronic components will allow it to occur. Now, the question is, how do you produce electricity? Anybody know? I don't feel bad when I was in electronic engineering. Don't pay attention to the videotape. I asked them many times, Professor, how in the world do you produce electricity? Well, when you move a magnetic field through a coil of wire, it dislodges the electron of the copper atom, the farthest one away, right? And that electron has an electromagnetic field. And as a result of it, the external magnetic field, when it's greater in intensity, then the electron will pluck it out, just like voltage will do so. And as a result, you now have created current flow in one direction, and since the copper atom has a missing electron, it goes to a positive charge to create voltage. And as a result of this, you now use the electromagnetic field of the coil to restrict the amps and allow voltage to take over to perform its work to split the water molecule, which is called the electrical polarization process. Go ahead. In order to do this, we had now to develop the VIC coil. Now, note in the development of the technology, I not only had to develop the technology in the garage, but we had to comply with the KISS method. Anybody know what it is?
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple, stupid, don't make it complicated. It was developed in the eyes of a businessman. What did it have to comply with? It had to comply with the law of economics. There's a lot of Cadillac ideas that come in existence, but they never get out in the marketplace because why? They violate the law of economics. The guy who comes up with the cheapest way is going to win out. That's the bottom line. So when you look at this technology, as a research development engineer, as a product development engineer, you will not hurt my feelings. You can get out and walk out of this meeting anytime you so desire. I would do the same thing. When I look at new technology, if it doesn't comply with the law of economics, it has no value to me because you can't get it out in the marketplace. It cannot become a useful invention. So when I present this technology to you, you must ask the question, does in fact this technological base comply with the law of economics? And if it does, then you would have to concur that we have a way of bringing a new energy system into the economy of the United States and the world and do it very quickly under the retrofit program. In order to do this, your answer, for an example, is that you notice that the resonant coils are wrapped close to the core here. I'm allowing the magnetic field not to only enter into the secondary primary to up its voltage, but I'm also allowing it to go and enter into the resonant coils, which are made of stainless steel 403 F or 403 FR material, which acts as a resistor, but as you apply an external magnetic field to it, and as it's generating its own electromagnetic field through its inductance, capacitance, characteristics of its coil, it now allows us to be able to restrict the amps, allow voltage to take over to perform in a dead short condition. So now, most of the patents up to this date have been issued on the processing. But I will assure you that if you don't go on and design the systems engineering of that system, you can receive a technological blockage. Is it not so? What happens if a foreign power could control the design and development of the VIC coil, even though I had the process on the electrical polarization process? If they control the development of that coil, could I get it in the marketplace? Absolutely not. So it was a requirement that I would go into systems, full systems engineering. Many inventors and developers fail because they don't continue to carry the development of the technology out into the marketplace, and that's why they stumble. And the multi-internationals or others seek that form of control and know that the inventor many times do not have the emphasis to go forward. Why do I go forward when I meet such great opposition? You know, back during the embargo, I didn't have one white hair on my head. And believe me, I have fought many legal battles to assure that this technology would get in. And I'm sure that I'm going to get a couple more white hairs before it's all over with. Go ahead. Now we know in electrical power, there's two aspects to electrical power, right? There is amp flow, which consumes electrical power, isn't that so? And then you have voltage. If I were to restrict the amps, what do we have left over? Voltage. Voltage is not consumed in an electronic circuit, therefore it becomes potential energy. Can you use potential energy to perform work? The answer is yes. If my pointer was a metal bar and I permanently magnetize it, would not the magnetic field go from end to end? Now once the magnetic field is formed, is there any more energy going in to maintain that magnetic field? No. Therefore, that becomes potential energy. Could I not take the metal bar, go over, lift the pin off the table, defy the law of gravity, therefore perform work? Absolutely. Therefore, voltage now, as we know in law of physics, can and does perform work. And heretofore, no one ever dreamed of using opposite electrical voltage being pulsed in a sequential mode in order to perform the work to split the water molecule in a simple physical process. Isn't that amazing? Go ahead. Okay, we found out that as you increase voltage amplitude, hydrogen gas is not being produced in a linear function in reference to amp flow, because we're restricting amp flow. It's now being produced in an exponential function. The higher the voltage, the more hydrogen gas is being generated. Now what we're doing is learning certain characteristics now, and we're going to take it and system engineer it to a viable retrofit energy system. Go ahead. We're adding laser energy to it, to not only to aid the splitting of the water molecule through the electrical polarization process, but we're going to take it into the hydrogen fracturing technology to tap into an energy source of immense magnitude, capable of not only maintaining the industrial base of our country, but to maintain our military integrity. You know, when I was young, I learned, I was a pacifist, I did not believe in fighting, but I learned a long time ago in this world, you must negotiate from a period of strength. And therefore we must protect the military integrity of the United States. What is it used to build up our economy, and yet we have no way to protect our country? And so therefore it became imperative that we would develop the technology as a retrofit energy system. You see, we also became embarrassed. Not only did we only have 2.5 days of aviation fuel to maintain global defense, are you aware that our sophisticated naval task force out in the Atlantic Ocean stood there for 2.5 weeks with no fuel before the first supply ship came alongside? Are you aware that in fact, since we had no diesel fuel, that our diesel-fired submarines became inoperable? And because of the nuclear modules that are set up in our nuclear fleet, are you aware that in that inter-period of time, that over 60% of our nuclear fleet became inoperable? In my personal opinion, if Russia would have known it at that time, we were very vulnerable, we could have been attacked. We must maintain the military integrity of this country. Go ahead. So now we're starting to raise the voltage amplitude higher, and we get to the point that we're starting now to pluck off the electrons, and we're on, as the water molecule is now being separated in a physical process, changing the time-share rate of the electron, switching off the covalent bonding, we're now starting to pluck off its electrons, because we want to start to destabilize the combustible gas atoms. Go ahead. Now here we're going into the resonant cavity, and as we raise the voltage, we're plucking the electrons. And when you pluck the electrons, like from the oxygen atom, does not the oxygen atom take on a positive electrical charge at this point when it's liberated? Do you not have liberated negative charged particles floating around in the water bath? Or are they not now being attenuated and oscillated in the electrical polarization process? So now we are superimposing a physical impact on the electrical polarization process, and we're starting to go into mega yield of hydrogen gas generation that heretofore was never ever dreamed of, and being able to release the hydrogen from water. You remember on the electrolysis process is a dead short condition. It will, because of dead short condition, it'll allow voltage potential around 2 volts. So you can't go into resonance, you can't go into atomic resonance because it's a dead short condition. It's only being oscillated by amp flow, not by voltage attenuation. Go ahead. We found out that it works in all forms of natural water, even including the most purest form of distilled water. When we certified all of the waters around the world for the patent office to certify it, we were producing tremendous yields. When we presented it to Artco Steel in the presence of 3 of their physicists and 4 of their chemists, when we said go ahead and put the most purest form of ionized water in it, when we were producing pounds and pounds of hydrogen gas, which the prior said you couldn't do, guess what? They sat down and we had the most interesting conversation for the next hour or so, and say the least they wanted to come in and develop the technology. See, I make a statement, but then I prove it. Now, so far I'm using voltage and shutting off the flow of ants. Does that cost me very much? Am I complying with the law of economics? Secondly, I'm using stainless steel 304 material, which chemically entered to the process. And under actual certification lab testing, the longevity is 0.000, man, Lord, it's getting good, 1 per year. That means the voltage zones are just as good as the day you fired up, going up to 10,000 years. And if any of you guys stay around 10,000 years, you come back and see me. I want to find the answer. But if I don't have to replace the voltage zones, am I still complying with the law of economics? Go ahead. You know, if a brilliant engineer could get an electrolysis process to run down the road, how long would it last? Roughly about 5 to 10 minutes. An electrolysis process is a self-destructing unit. What we're doing now is setting up a totally physical process and allowing voltage to perform the work to split the water molecule. Now we find out some very interesting things. As we attenuated the amplitude in reference to pulse frequency, we hit resonant action. We started supercharging the process. When we hit resonance, we found out that if we shut it off, we allow the resonant action to maintain for 5 seconds, shut it off, we were producing hydrogen gas for 94 seconds. So if you divide 5 seconds into 94 seconds, we're producing hydrogen gas 19 times more in our power output stage than on the input stage. Isn't that amazing? Anywhere along the line, you can re-excite it and go right back into resonant action. We found another very interesting thing. Maybe the power supply is exactly the same when you start to function. Hydrogen gas, it starts and goes in a geometrical progression, continues to increase because of the electrical charge and compounding action of the electrical charges that are being released in the water bath, and it keeps continuing to increase in production rate until you reach the maximum flow rate going into the resonant cavity, which brings on a fifth control, complying with NASA's second major requirement to be able to produce the gas on demand. Go ahead. Oh boy. Now we got a gas that we can release 2.5 times powerful than gasoline. We're doing it economically. Ordinary natural water using stainless steel plates, restricting the anti voltage to take over. We can attenuate its production. Do you know hydrogen is a very volatile fuel, is it not? We have to come up with a retrofit energy system. We don't have time to come up with new power plants to be able to convert to cars and trucks and planes. We have to maintain the industrial base. You know, Saddam Hussein has access to the viral germ and genetic restructuring. It breeds on the bacteria of air and water and oil. He has the Masada complex, that if I'm going to go, we're all going to go. And if he contaminates that oil overnight, every country in the world will have to shut off the flow of oil for fear of contaminating their people and contaminating their country. You know, he's not in love with us. How do we now come up with a retrofit energy system complying with the law of economics, giving us the ability as a retrofit energy system? You have to go through the blue zone. I don't care what type of hydrogen generation system you have, you got to go through Meyer's blue zone to render hydrogen safer than that of natural gas. Boy, how are you going to do that? Research outfit out in California spent $2.5 million trying to come up with an engine to run off of hydrogen, and they shut it down using the exotic ceramics. We don't have the materials capable of operating it, and shut it down. But how do we get our trucks moving? How do we get the goods and services to be maintained in our economies? We got to go through the blue zone to render hydrogen safer than natural gas. Go ahead. Here you see a hydrogen flame projecting 7 to 9 inches high. First time in history, you're seeing a hydrogen and oxygen flame being sustained and maintained around 47 centimeters a second. You know, normally when you light hydrogen, what happens to it? It goes, right? It burns around 325 centimeters a second. How is it that after we ignite this, that this flame is being sustained and maintained from ordinary natural water? Go ahead. There's another characteristic of natural water. It's like a sponge. It will absorb ambient air. You know, when I was in my 9th grade science class, I asked the teacher, I said, "Hey, teach, when you light the match, why don't the atmosphere burn up?" I said, "Well, Stan, you know, the atmosphere is composed of non-burnable gases, or non-combustible gases. Gases that will not support the burning process, like nitrogen and argon." I remembered that. And the Lord told me, I was equating and said, no, I need a ratio of 200 to 1. And the Lord said, just go over and light it. I said, no, Lord, I need a 200 to 1 ratio. He says, no, go over and light it. And finally, I yielded and went and lit it. And I was sustaining and maintaining it around 47 centimeters a second from ordinary natural water and using water as a gas mixing regulator. You see, not only are we separating the hydrogen and oxygen atom, but in the world, natural water absorbs between 17 to 19% of ambient air, which the bulk of ambient air is composed of non-combustible gases that do not support the burning process. And as we are now uniformly releasing this gas, it's a multi-gas generator that's automatically taking it and adjusting the burn rate of the hydrogen gas down around 47 centimeters a second. Now, isn't that amazing? Now, if I'm using the water as a gas mixing regulator, does it cost me anything? Hell zippo, right? Go ahead. How much does it cost us for rainwater? Anybody know? I gave testimonies down at the Capitol building and so forth. They were trying to figure out how to tax rainwater. I said, well, you guys, you're asking the wrong question. You're asking the wrong guy. Because you see, the old-fashioned rain barrel will come in. All right, now, if NASA would have had this technology, in all probability, the astronauts would have not died. But I was developing the technology. As I mentioned earlier, there was a one stage that I said, either I'll get the car running today. It was late in the day, and I was tired. And I said, either I'm going to get the car running today, or I'm going to blow a hole through this thing. This thing is going to go through the living room floor. And I had no way of anti-spark back device. And to say the least, the living room floor raised up a couple of feet. And I told the Lord I would not develop any technology unless I comply with the federal and state safety code regulations. So in developing this technology, you not only have to comply with the law of economics, but you're going to have to comply with all the safety code regulations. Otherwise you can't get it in, right? So we found out that when the multi-gas is coming off the water, if you send it through a small little passageway, somewhere along the line, the non-combustible gases separate the hydrogen and oxygen atom. Now, in the law of physics, it's a requirement that the hydrogen and oxygen atom come together, right? But if you keep them separated, can they spark at night? And the answer is no. So therefore, when you mix non-combustible gases with the hydrogen and oxygen gases, you now have a quenching effect, and it's an anti-spark back device, regardless of gas pressure or gas volume. Now, isn't that something? Now, these are simple ideas, but they're very profound ideas. Go ahead. From ordinary natural water, as you see on the flame there, that flame was over 5,000 degrees, melting steel. How are you doing that with natural water? Putting voltage onto it. He says you cannot be done. Remember earlier in the talk I said if you're going to file your patents, you never file patents on over-unity devices. I assure you will never get patents. You file on mode of operability. When they came back and said, Stan, we're calculating this and we're calculating that, and I said, you're not calculating anything because I am filing on mode of operability. And you stop there and say, go. All right. Therefore, we're sustaining it. We developed a quenching circuit for anti-spark back device that happens to be aluminum material. And as aluminum material, it normally melts around 3,000 degrees, but we have a 5,000 degree flame. How's that? Well, the non-combustible gases now is retarding the speed by which the oxygen and hydrogen comes together, and as a result of that, it now acts as a cooling agent and lifts the hydrogen flame right off the surface, and therefore it's a cold process. If you see the fuel cell operating, you put your hand on it, it's totally cool because you're not consuming amps in the process. Go ahead. All right, now to demonstrate this, when I was filing the patent office came to me and said, Stan, we know about styrometrics. We know you take the hydrogen and hit a hot plate, put energy in the hot plate to get the energy out of the hydrogen, right? And interact with the air. But notice when we lit that, it sustained and maintained. You no longer had to put any energy in to release the energy coming from the flame. And he said, we don't know what the heck you're talking about adjusting the burn rate of the hydrogen gas. Well, if I explain it to you, do I get my patents? So you got to put it between a hard rock and a hard place. All right, if I had a flash tube here, fill with hydrogen and oxygen and air, if I ignited at one end, you measure it in 1 second, it'll burn 325 centimeters. If I put natural gas in here and mix it with ambient air gases, it'll burn for 42 centimeters in a second. So it became very obvious that if I would take the non-combustible gases and mix it with the hydrogen gas and the oxygen, I now can adjust the burn rate to co-equal that of the fossil fuels. In other words, I'm now using the non-combustible gases they act as a gas modulator that slows down the speed by which the oxygen and hydrogen atom comes together, and as a result, I now can control its burn rate. Now, isn't that amazing? Now, that was the #1 invention, capable as a retrofit energy system, that we now can adjust the burn rate to co-equal the fossil fuels. Go ahead. And right here, now we can adjust the burn rate of hydrogen to co-equal gasoline, natural gas, propane, diesel fuel. We can take it all the way down and burn leaves and paper. So when they say you can't do something, in a scientific inquiry, you say, why not? And you start to seek out the answer. Don't allow the negative aspect to come forth to you to demotivate you. Go on, press on. Because somewhere along the line, if you ask the Lord for the information, He's going to give it to you. He says, ask, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened, right? So when I asked the Lord, He never showed me a vision. The only thing He would do, it would ask me a question. What happens if you would expose the water molecule to voltage? What would happen if you would mix non-combustible gases with the hydrogen and oxygen? Well, Lord, you're going to adjust the burn rate. Go ahead. That was the #1 invention that gave us the abilities to as a retrofit energy system. All right, we're producing a high temperature flame, as you see there. If we melted the stainless steel pots and pans, our wives would get pretty upset with us, right? Say, oh, hubby, man, you really blew it this time. Look at my pots and pans. How do you lower the temperature from 5,000 degrees down to 200 or 300 degrees? Do it under the law of economics. Well, if you run the gases through the flame, the gases coming off the flame is non-combustible gases, right? Can I capture those gases, recycle it back into the flame, recycle it back in the generator, adjust its cycling rate, and therefore lower the hydrogen burn rate to co-equal the fossil fuels? Now, does it cost me anything to do it above the apparatus? No. Go ahead. How do you run an internal combustion engine? You saw a Volkswagen engine run. How do you do that? As a design engineer, you look at the internal combustion in 3 ways. Is it a mechanical drive device? Get us here tonight? Second one, is it an air pump? Pumps the air in through the carburetor and shuts it out the exhaust? Is it a manufacturer of non-combustible gases?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Therefore, you take the non-combustible gas meter, mix it with the water fuel cell, adjust the burn rate to exactly to co-equal the combustion burn rate of gasoline and diesel fuel or LP gas or whatever you're running in an internal combustion engine. Now, since I'm using the ambient air and the non-combustible gases from ambient air, which non-combustible gases are not interacting with the combustion process because the temperatures are not that high. Does it cost them anything? Still complying with the law of economics? Okay, go ahead. Here's another $1 billion patent. The prior art of transporting hydrogen down the road is cryogenics, right? Cool it down to 465 degrees below zero, pressurize it, put it in a pressure tank, put it on a truck, and transport down the road, right? You're spending energy transported down the road, right? Now, can I take the ambient air, expose it to flame to create the non-combustible gases to adjust the burn rate of the hydrogen gas less than or co-equal that of fossil fuels like natural gas? Therefore, I don't even have to change the gas grid system in the United States. Can I take hundreds of thousands of cubic feet of ambient air gases, the non-combustible gases, mix it with the hydrogen and oxygen atom, and be able to now transport it to the conventional gas grid systems without even changing a valve or a pipe? Absolutely. Am I still complying with the law of economics? The key was not only to develop one aspect of the technology, we had to develop it that the technology would move in a bilateral movement throughout the entire economy and make sure that every aspect is totally legalized in order that when we bring it out totally, we will not receive the statutory blockage to bring it in. The greatest disservice that I would see is to bring out and show the technology, the viability of the technology, and that some foreign entity is holding up the blocking patterns and says, Stan Myers, you cannot bring it into the economy. America, you cannot be able to sustain your industrial base. Stan Myers, you will not be able to aid in helping to keep your country strong. So it became imperative that that legal base would be totally protected at all costs. Go ahead. Now we've gone through and shown a lot of the effect of voltage. Remember the alignment going into molecular elongation, changing the time, share rate of the electron, we're liquid to gas ionization state, but we're now going down here to the atomic destabilization of the combustible gas atoms. We need to protect the military integrity of the United States and also the industrial base of this country and all the other countries of the world. You know, Einstein said that if you could release this energy from a gallon of water, or from water, that energy is so tremendous that it could power a 1,000-car train around the earth many, 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 many times. How do we do it? Go ahead. And so in development, if you notice that there are many steps in the development of this technology, and we have to comply with the national security laws. We had to comply with the PCT Treaty Act. We had to comply with under the PCT Treaty Act, not only for this country, but other countries who said and request under the PCT Treaty Act, this technology must be protected to our country at all costs. So you see, we're faced with the same problems. So it became imperative that we be protected. Here we're now taking the liberated combustible gas atoms, and we're now going to destabilize it. We're going to take the combustible gas atoms into subcritical state. Now, how much energy does it take to trigger a thermonuclear device? Anybody know? Just about that much energy. All they do is take a subcritical mass here, subcritical mass here, put it here, and it goes into critical state. Now, in the contemplation of this, how can I tap into this enormous energy source and contemplate it? And the Lord said to me and asked me the question, what would happen if you would prevent the water molecule from forming during thermal gas ignition? You see, we looked at the gas combustion process all of our lives. But we didn't understand, or would not understand, or we would not perceive long enough to say what really is happening in releasing that energy. Now, if I light the hydrogen and oxygen gases, and I prevent the water molecule from forming, normally the hydrogen and oxygen atom comes together, is releasing energy, is it not? But when the water molecules form, the energy stops. Is it not so? All right? But if I would prevent stability from occurring, what would take place? Well, Lord, one of two things will occur. Energy would continue to be released until another atom structure is formed, or an implosion effect would occur and release pure energy. But you see, now, during the time, when I was in Washington, D.C. in 1965, the government called in the experts to come up with a fail-safe nuclear power system. In 3 days in the meeting, I got up in the meeting, and unfortunately, I wasn't really right with the Lord at the time. And I said, gentlemen, everything you said is a bunch of BS. There's no substance on the face of this earth that's subject to the hostile environment of nuclear radiation, uranium 238s and 235s. You're going to have the hourglass effect occur. And my prophecy and said longevity is roughly 15 years came true on the 3 Mile Island. Now, we have a worse problem. We talked about, Chernobyl. Are you aware of it in the book of Revelation? It says the wormwood will make the waters bitter and many would die. The Russian word Chernobyl means wormwood. It's a small little bitter root plant that grows over in a valley in Russia. And they always talk about the radiation going in the atmosphere. They went over to North Sweden where they had to kill all of their animals and reindeer. But they don't talk about that in the meltdown it's gone down on the water table. And the water table is continually reacting and being exposed to radiation. Are you aware of that? And now hundreds and thousands and millions of Europeans that are going to be exposed to the radiation of the water table, dumping into the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, are now going to die of cancer being exposed to high radiation. But we got an even worse problem than that. Are you aware of that the reaction is still occurring? All they did was put concrete on top of it and put a little bit of other chemicals on top of it, but it's still in a reaction. If it goes into supernova, when the atomic mass starts to increase, it starts setting up a resonance. You start getting a high resonant pulse frequency, and if it interreacts with the electromagnetic field strength of the Earth, if it reacts with the energy grid system of the Earth, guess what you're going to have? You're going to have a secondary explosion that will probably create a crater of about 5 miles across in diameter, about 4 miles deep, and that type of an explosion will possibly deflect the Van Allen belts, which in turn now would flip the Earth. We're on 22.5 degree axis. And if that type of explosion will occur, I will assure you, you'll come out with an electromagnetic pulse wave that will hit every nuclear power plant across Western Europe. And you're going to have a triggering system of all these nuclear power plants are going to start triggering right down the line, because you see, their electronic control systems are not set up to handle a very high intense magnetic pulse wave. And look at France, of all the nuclear plants that they have in existence. You think we don't have a problem that's confronting us? But how do we do it safely? Scientists ran to say, okay, we'll go to nuclear fusion. And so Livermore Laboratory comes up and says, we will expose the hydrogen atom to a high temperature around 10 million degrees. We will be able to subject it to tremendous pressure, and we'll squeeze the hydrogen nuclei to form helium and release energy and release it safely. We'll try to duplicate the sun, but learn to ask the right question. 1/3 of the sun is composed of oxygen atoms. You know, atoms have intelligence like you and I have intelligence, and animals have intelligence. And once you start to understand that, you can start to stimulate and have the atoms react in a certain way. Do you know that there's a unique atom that has the intelligence to be able to release thermal explosive energy more than any other atom on Earth? What is it? It's called the oxygen atom, is it not? Can you have a combustion process without the oxygen atom? It releases thermal explosive energy from other atoms. 1/3 of the sun is composed of oxygen atoms. Scientists don't want to consider the full elements of what's taking place in the sun. Another process that they came up with, and they demonstrated very successful in the university, called the muon process. Anyone ever heard of that? Well, the muon process, you've got the hydrogen nuclei, you got the electron here, right? And so what they do is they took a muon, which is twice the mass size of the electron, which had a characteristic of that, to trick the hydrogen atom to accept the muon, and then get the hydrogen atom to eject its natural electron. And once that occurred, then the muon decays in a billionth of a second. And when it decays, under Einstein's equation, energy equals mass times the square of light, it says whenever you decrease mass, energy yields increased. So when that muon decays, it decreases the mass of the hydrogen atom, does it not? And that energy that's in the nucleus to maintain the orbital velocity of that electron says, under the law of physics, I must what? Stabilize, is not so? And therefore it releases energy. Enormous amounts of energy, and it releases it safely. But it's a Cadillac idea. It takes billions of dollars to try to come up with a muon generator to sustain and propagate the system, for you see the muon decays in a billionth of a second. But it was very well demonstrated very successfully in the universities of this country. Now, in the interim period of time in developing the technology, you know, the United States government took a group of scientists out in the Midwest, I don't know if you remember that, gave them $1 billion, $2 billion or so, and said, come up with an answer to the energy problem. The Lord took me down to $3 in my pocket and said, by faith you're going to put an energy system in the country? I said, oh yes, Lord. Recently, the scientists wrote a letter to Congress and informed Congress and said, well, we spent your money, but we don't have an answer to the energy problem. Well, don't worry about it. A little man down in Grove City, Ohio, started out with $3 in his pocket by faith and has a very viable answer to the energy problem. So, sometimes the Lord will confound the wise in order to be able to try to bring technology forward. We see there's a lot of efforts to try to bring and stop this type of technology from getting out in the marketplace. Go ahead. In order to do this, we now develop what we call a hydrogen gun technology, or a gas resonant cavity. We're now introducing laser energy into the system. We do not need high energy lasers to accomplish the task. We are using solid state lasers. Those are actually LEDs. If anyone knows about LEDs, do they not in a discrete amount of light frequency? Are they not a solid state laser? And as a result, if you put them together, you can come up with the laser intensity and pulse them in such a way that you're now co-equaling or maximizing the absorption of photon energy into the process. Go ahead, as we're exposing to high voltage. Go ahead. To do this, we now develop the electron extraction circuit. This is where we're taking the liberated electrons and we're now taking it out of the resonant cavity. If I set up an alternate pulse here, for an example, and these negative charge electrons now, if I would apply a positive voltage field potential here, would not the negative charge electrons go along this wire, interact with the filament of this light bulb to produce heat energy from light energy? Am I defining the laws of physics? No. If I apply high voltage pulse to it, those liberated electrons can be taken right out of the resonant cavity. So as these negative charged electrons are going down the wire, have I not complied with the definition of producing electricity? Is not electricity defined as moving electrons down a wire? So the byproduct of the hydrogen fracturing technology to prevent the formation of the water molecule from forming during thermal gas ignition, guess what? Is electricity. Now isn't that amazing? Becomes a self-sustained oscillation system. Go ahead. All right, now we got another problem here. There's another uniqueness. You know, Einstein said that if you extend your hands in opposite direction, somewhere along the line your hands are going to meet. Saying that our universe is circular in nature, is it not? Mm-hmm. The red effect in astronomy shows that our galaxy is expanding at an alarming rate, is it not so? In order for our galaxies to expand, mass must be created, right? How is it that you can take a seed of a plant, a little seed, and plant it in the ground, and that seed grows a tree? And it manufactures atoms, and it manufactures molecules, and it manufactures chemical processes, and to sustain life. How is it that that little seed can create mass in the atoms and the molecules? You ever thought about that? You know, normally in the scripture it says the energy comes from the throne of God day and night. So the energy coming into the third dimension is in the form of light energy. And imagine that this is going through an optical fiber optics, and the light energy has a native intelligence on it. And so as it goes down to the third dimension, it now starts the vortex. See, the light energy has intelligence from God. And so the vortexing now occurs, and as it absolutely occurs, guess what? Photon energy is now developed, is it not? And for photon energy, the photon energy now groups together to form the electrons. And now when it forms electrons, it now goes ahead and forms protons. And then the protons go ahead and forms molecules, and the molecules now form chemical processes. And now the chemical processes sustains life as we know it. We talk about ether energy, do we not? How about vacuum energy? We say that in an atom, here's the nucleus and here's the electron, and somewhere along in that area there, if we build and devise a detector, we can use that energy source, can we not? Is that what this conference is all about? How can we tap into this energy source? It's an enormous amount of energy. Wheeler in 1979, I believe, at Princeton University, got a magnetic flux density around 10 to the 93rd power, showing and demonstrating that in fact there is no more question of vacuum energy. It's there. But how do you tap into it? How can you utilize it safely? How can you be able to do it in a way that you can maintain the economies of the world? Well, now to understand this a little bit further, under the law of physics says everything must reach a stable state. Is that not so? Mm-hmm. Right? If I take an atom and I without adding any form of chemicals to it, it's a physical process. Why? Because do you consume a voltage field in an electronic circuit? No. Voltage performs a physical process of opposite electrical attraction. Therefore, when you release the hydrogen and oxygen atom, therefore when you release it, you're now processing and using the energy from the hydrogen atom, which is 2.5 times greater than that of gasoline. That's not my figures, that's the National Bureau of Figures, National Bureau of Standards figures. You can go over there and look at their books. You will see that that energy is 2.5 times gasoline. Notice the reference. It's not 2.5 times fingernail polish, and it's not 2.5 times lipstick. It's 2.5 times gasoline. It's a very powerful fuel. Now, since we're now overcoming the electrical attraction force, go ahead. We are also now starting to switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecules. So when they tell you it takes a tremendous amount of energy to release something. For an example, I have an electrical magnet here, and I energize electromagnets, and I draw electrons in that orbit. It says I don't want any more electrons. I'm not going to exchange electrons, and so the dielectric value of water is around 78.54, or it poses the movement of electrons 78.54 times greater than air. Is it not so?
Yep.
So if you don't process the water in any way, utilize and key in on the dielectric properties of water. Now, these are very simple answers to a very complex problem. I will assure you, back during the era of embargo, there was not in the books. If they were in the books, I would not have obtained the patents into processing. In order to do this now, when I put the dielectric liquid between two electrical plates, what do I form? Electronic guys, capacitor, do I not? Now, if I hook a coil in series to this capacitor, here and here, what do I have developed? A resonant charging tube, do I not? And therefore now you set up a pulsing where you're now taking like 12 volts and amplifying up to 20,000 volts, and as you pulse this, you now create the magnetic field of the coil, which opposes the movement of the electron. And because of the inductance capacitance of the coil, you are now directly related to the velocity or the speed of the moving of the electron. Is it not so? So if you will slow down the movement of the speed of the velocity of the electron, if you now slow down the gyroscopic action within the nucleus, you now can weaken the electromagnetic fields of the atoms. Now we know in physics there are four forces that affect the atom. What are they? Electrical force, the electromagnetic force, weak and strong nuclear force. What's the number one that affects the other three? Voltage. You attenuate the electrical fields of the atom, you can attenuate the fields of all of the other parts of the atom by voltage. Go ahead. Now how do we do this? We do it in such a way that we don't consume a great deal of power. The Lord had me to develop what we call a BIC coil. Now we've taken the voltage zones here and we've now constructed a resonant cavity. Now, is not natural water a dielectric liquid? Mm-hmm. Sure it is. Since it has 8 electrons in its L orbit, it has a total capacity of 8 electrons. A metal plate up to it that weighed 1 ton. As long as that electromagnet is creating the electromagnetic field to hold the metal, if you kept on trying to pull that metal, you would never break the field, right? Mm-hmm. But how much energy does it take it to go over there and simply switch off the switch to de-energize the coil? Would not the metal just simply fall apart? So on the covalent switch off, what happens is you're putting electrical stress. Are you not now deflecting that negative charge electron to the positive voltage field? Is that not so in physics? You ever look at gas ionization tubes? Therefore, what happens is you're now translating the electrical stress to the particles inside the nucleus that are arranged in a geometrical configuration. They are now spinning, and as you put the electrical stress onto these component parts inside the nucleus, it now slows down the gyroscopic speed, and under the electromagnetic theory of magnetism says that whenever an electrically charged particle moves through an electrostatic field, what's its byproduct? Anybody know? The electromagnetic energy. So the strength of the electromagnetic energy is to allowing voltage to be applied across the resonant cavity and restricting ampload by 90 degrees. So therefore, when you adjust the pulse frequency, you're tuning into the dielectric properties of water. Ampload goes down to minimum, and voltage tries to go towards infinity if the electronic components will allow it to occur. Now, the question is, how do you produce electricity? Anybody know? I don't feel bad when I was in electronic engineering. Don't pay attention to the videotape. I asked him many times, Professor, how in the world do you produce electricity? Well, when you move a magnetic field through a coil of wire, it dislodges the electron of the copper atom, the farthest one away, right? And that electron has an electromagnetic field. And as a result of it, the external magnetic field, when it's greater in intensity, then the electron will pluck it out, just like voltage will do so. And as a result, you now have created current flow in one direction, and since the copper atom has a missing electron, it goes to a positive charge to create voltage. And as a result of this, you now use the electromagnetic field of the coil to restrict the atoms and allow voltage